So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for The Well-Rounded Musician with Alexa Tarantino. My name is Adam Meeks. I'm the video producer here at Jazz at Lincoln Center, and I'll be hosting for tonight. This is a brand new series that we're launching tonight, and over the coming weeks, Alexa is going to teach viewers about the different kinds of tools that musicians need to succeed in the real world. This first episode is going to cover a day in the life, daily practice preparation and techniques, establishing your priorities, time management and productivity tips, and more. Alexa Tarantino is an accomplished saxophonist, multi-instrumentalist, composer, band leader, educator, and an alumna of Jazz at Lincoln Center's Essentially Ellington High School Jazz Band program. We're thrilled to offer this platform for her to share her insight with everyone. And so when it's time for the Q&A section today, I'll jump back in and explain how to ask a question. And for now, we hope you all enjoy this session. Alexa, off to you.
Thanks, Adam. Hi, everybody. I hope you are doing well. I'm very happy to be here presenting the first episode of The Well-Rounded Musician, A Day in Your Life. As Adam said, I'm a New York City-based jazz saxophonist and received my education from the Eastman School of Music and the Juilliard School. And this is really kind of about the stuff that you don't necessarily pick up in music school and these real world ideas that can help you to hone in on and define your success. So tonight's about you. You're welcome to check out my website, alexatarantino.com, for more info on me, but I really want to kind of just dive in here. So with this new show, we're hoping to reach a wide audience of students, musicians, educators, families looking to learn more about what is behind building a music career. And today is highlighting that you are the one that has to take care of yourself. You have to design the career that you want and go after it. And you do have the power to make it happen. So this doesn't just happen overnight. And you need to groom yourself intellectually, emotionally, and musically to be in this career. It's a passion and it's a calling, and it requires us to be super focused, driven, and creative. But I don't mean just musically creative. So I get a lot of people asking me about my practice routine and how I might manage all the many avenues of my career, and how many of us freelancers are managing the many different avenues. And my first thing that I would say, especially for this condensed lesson today, is the first thing is establish your priorities. Define your mission. What are your strengths? What sets you apart from everybody else? And there are many, books and Google articles you can read on how to create a mission statement. But for me, it's really just kind of a broader overview of what really makes me happy. What do I feel that my purpose is? Like, why am I here? And so for me, I might say, I want to tour and perform as a leader and side woman in projects that bring joy to the audiences and to the band members. And I want to inspire and educate the next generation while doing that. And I'm sure for many people, it might be something similar. It could be something totally different. Another version of that might be, I want to use my creativity and passion every day to help and bring joy to people all over the world through jazz and education. So whatever that is for you, and it's not something that's going to come in 5 minutes. I mean, I often will just write these down randomly, and I've had different versions of them over the years and months and weeks, and even in this quarantine. So sometimes it helps to just grab a piece of paper and just do a brain dump. What makes you happy? What doesn't make you happy? What's exciting to you? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And just laying it all out, and kind of, if you had your ideal scenario, what would you be contributing to a community, and how would that make you feel? So that's that. And second, from there, underneath that umbrella mission, hone in on the goals that you need to set to get there. And there's a difference between a goal and an objective, and I'm going to get to that in a second. So for a goal, you might say, I want to start my own working band, or I want to have my own private teaching studio, or I want to bring music to soup kitchens in my community. So under each goal, you need objectives that are clear and actionable items that will get to these goals. And I think for a lot of people, it's kind of like, yeah, cool, like mission statement, goals, objectives, yada, yada, yada. But for me, this has really made such a huge difference. And I think the most fascinating thing as a musician, when you are called to play in so many situations, variety of styles, variety of ensemble sizes, variety of venues that you're playing at, when you really take a minute to look at what drives you and fuels you, you kind of realize, like I haven't really been following this, or I've been so caught up doing this that I really lost my drive in this one area. So I think we can all benefit from taking a moment to reflect on what really drives us and to set a new or restated mission with goals and objectives underneath. So let's take this soup kitchen idea. For that to be our goal, let's have 3 objectives under there. One objective could be, okay, I'm going to create a contact database of 10 soup kitchens in my area. Another objective could be, I'm going to find 1 or 2 people that will play with me. Maybe I'm a guitarist, so maybe I'll call, a bassist and a vocalist. Or if I'm a saxophonist, which I am, maybe I'll pick a bassist and somebody with a keyboard. And then the third objective could be to draft an email template and contact the point person for each of these soup kitchens nearby, maybe by phone or by email using the info that you've laid out. So instead of sitting there and feeling like, oh my gosh, it feels so overwhelming. I mean, I would love to give back to people. I would love to get involved in my community by playing for soup kitchens. Wouldn't that be such a lovely idea? Instead of looking at that as a what if or as a pipe dream, this type of exercise of kind of sharpening things down this mission, goals, and objectives path can really help to make you see that this is possible. And so there are many things that I can think of in my career looking back where I never thought something would have actually happened. For example, I started a jazz camp when I was 21 years old in Rockport, Massachusetts. And now when I look back on it, I think to myself, how on earth did I do that? While I was in school and doing 2 degrees and all this and working remotely. But when I think about it, I remember all the to-do lists and all of the notebooks and breaking down of this type of brainstorming that really led to taking things in baby steps. And it helps to break something down that might feel so huge to something a little bit more manageable, a little bit more, easy to digest. So from there, if you have your template of contacting these soup kitchen owners and you have your band set up and you have dates that you're available, you can draft your set list. You can organize logistics such as, we need to be placed near an outlet and we'll load in at this time and where can we park our car? And you can advertise your performances in the local papers. These are all things that are necessary to get the buzz around your event or around your work. And once everything falls into place and you have these things, you're brainstorming, you're writing it down and you're checking it off your list, it's just once you look back, you're like, wow, you feel like you've accomplished something, and you have. And so that's what I recommend to all of my students really, is looking at your mission, looking at your goals and objectives underneath that align with that. But most importantly, and what connects to today's theme of a day in your life, whatever you're doing each day needs to align with this mission, goal, and objectives, no matter what. So this is huge. There's unquestionably a time in every young musician and freelancer's life when you'll be saying yes to absolutely everything. And I can think of many times in the past several years when I just, somebody called, hey, are you available? Yes. Hey, can you do? Yes. One example is when I was at Eastman. I was a sophomore, and Ryan Truesdell, a good friend of mine who's a composer and band leader in New York, he was working on a project of Gil Evans' music. And at the time, he had first brought the music to the Eastman School just as kind of a test run to see, to see what it was like. And it ended up becoming a big project that won him a few Grammys. And this band, we went to the Umbria Jazz Festival to perform. And I was, I think, the youngest saxophonist at the school at that time. And so there was only a certain number of spots in the jazz band that was going to go to Europe. And the older guys were probably going to get them. And at one point, if any of you are familiar with Gil Evans' music, he is, famous for using just crazy instrumentation, many different colors, woodwinds, French horn, and so on. And so I knew that they were going to need, oboe and bassoon and all this. And so Ryan at one point was working through the instrumentation and trying to figure out who could play what. And there are some songs where you just needed oboe and you needed bassoon, but they couldn't necessarily afford to fly extra people. And so I just said, okay, I can do it. I'll do it. And learned oboe and bassoon in a very short amount of time. But so the first songs I learned on bassoon were Gil Evans tunes, not Hot Cross Buns. But it's just an example of like deciding that you're going to do something and make that your position. And so I said, like, I want to do that. And I don't see any reason why, it's helping him. And I know I'm going to put my best foot forward. But it was definitely a situation where I just said, yes, yes, yes. So I'm sure we have all been there. But the point of that story is that, in these moments of saying yes to everything, there might be things where you realize this does not fulfill me. And maybe that's not what I want to do all the time with my life. And so you'll find that, and that's really a blessing. That's a really great experience. It's not all the time that we can choose to say no to something, if it's not, up our alley, because as freelance musicians, there is the aspect of paying rent and paying bills. But I really am a firm believer that if you are positive and are clear on what you want and what drives and fuels you, you can really create your own work and create your own success. I still have trouble saying the word no to things, but I mean, it's a work in progress. So let's take a look at a daily routine. And I'd love to give you an example of what my daily routine is, to sort of find how can we keep this mission and goals and objectives going through everything that we're doing every day. So one of my biggest productivity tips for everybody is when you wake up, try to stay off screen as much as possible. And this has made a huge difference in my productivity. I know, when I used to wake up and go right onto my phone, I could easily lose 20 or 30 minutes scrolling on Instagram or going through emails or reading newsletters. And then I would feel in a frenzy before leaving, running to a rehearsal and missing the train and spilling my coffee. It just did not feel, it never felt like I was having a strong start to the day. And I realize I'm lucky because I don't, my schedule is different. I don't get up and go to work at 9 o'clock. And now we're all home, so it's a little different anyway. But I really recommend staying off screen as much as possible. And then I meditate and I stretch first thing, even if it's just 10 minutes. And then I'll, drink my tea, have my breakfast, and then read something, in the news, or spend a few minutes learning Italian on Duolingo, which is my new quarantine hobby. If anybody else is out there doing Duolingo, show yourselves, let's hear it. Maybe in the Q&A. So anyway, do not scroll. And then now that I've got myself kind of set up for the day, I'm already going to start getting to work. At this point, I have already set out my goals and my to-dos for the day from the night before. So there's no like waking up like, what do I have to do? And spending time like, what do I have to do? It's just I set it up the night before I went to bed, and then I can wake up feeling ready to tackle whatever it is. I wish that I could say that I go straight into practicing, but I don't. I know a lot of people that do. And for me, I just have this like nagging email inbox conscience on my shoulder that's like, I have emails, read me. And I don't know if anybody else has this problem, but it's an issue. And so I just decided to allow myself like 30, 45 minutes first thing to kind of chip away at that and get the conscience off my shoulder. And that way, when I do sit down to practice, I feel a little bit less like worried about what's happening in my inbox. So again, this is a unique routine, I realize, but for people who are home right now and have a similar lifestyle, or maybe a freelance musician, or you're a student and you're really trying to shed and work on specifics, this could be something you might want to try. Waking up, meditating, staying off screen, getting yourself ready, and then diving right in. And if you need to do a little bit of admin work beforehand, go ahead. I think that's fine. So it's after that little bit of admin time that I feel I can really focus on getting into more creative and meaningful work. So I mentioned this a little bit on Monday night's Skeins Domain for any of you who are joining Wynton Marsalis and his guests. I recently read this book, Unsubscribe, by Jocelyn Glide, that I love and I would recommend to anybody who's into productivity tips and tools. And she mentioned that anytime you're doing something and then you get a ping on your phone or whatever, and you take a second to check that, it can take you up to 25 minutes to get that level of focus and momentum back on what you were doing. And to me, it just makes total sense because I often feel this sense of urgency to answer a text message, to answer a call, and to respond to an email right away. And that person might need something, and then I respond and I show them available. And if they need something immediately, it can take a little bit more time. And then by the time I get to practicing, I've lost what I'm doing. So I still am working on it myself, but I really, really try to set clear times during the day for email time or, being on my phone. If I'm practicing, my phone's either in do not disturb or airplane mode, no matter what. And I really try to keep it out of the room if possible. If I'm using it for something, then I'll make sure it's on airplane or do not disturb. So Jocelyn Glide from Unsubscribe, she also mentions that you should start your day with something creative or meaningful, because once you go down like the email rabbit hole, you can be stuck there forever. So it's personal preference. It's up to you what works best for you. But I do a little bit of emails before practicing. And then I'll get into lunch after that and go back for some more meaningful work. It could be practicing. It could be making some teaching videos right now for people. It could be working on a grant application, working on marketing materials. That stuff might all involve technology, but it's different. It's a different type of focus than kind of sitting and dealing with emails and texts and whatever as they pop in. So just be conscious of what are you doing with your time? Is it meaningful, creative, productive, or is it sort of like empty, draining, and controlled by technology or social media? And at the end of my days, I try to exercise and call someone I love, especially now during the quarantine, and go on to make dinner and read, etc. So essentially, with that whole spiel, I hope it shows you that you really need to know what fuels you in order to prevent social media, outside standards and norms, and exterior motives and other people's needs from getting in the way of what ultimately would become your success. And so I think it's just so important, especially in this time when we have so many distractions and this instant gratification phenomenon pulling at us all the time. It's more important, now more than ever, to really stay focused on what means the most to you. And so the next part of this is I'd love to tell you all how I design my practice routines for any of the musicians out there that might find that interesting. So I have sort of found, a similar approach to my practice routine, which is, again, tech-free as much as possible, but doing things in a very organized, time batching, chunking manner. So actually, time batching, if you haven't heard of it already, is an idea where you do similar tasks all in one batch of time, as opposed to spreading it out over several days. So I have a friend, actually, she designed my website. Her name's Janelle Reichman, and she's a fantastic clarinetist and tenor saxophonist who has performed with the Jazz Lincoln Center Orchestra as well. And she turned me on to this whole thing of time batching, which is like, so she decided she's going to do all of her administrative work on Mondays, and that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, she's working on, building websites and practicing. And she finds that to be much more focused and efficient than if she were to work a little bit with, invoicing and receipts every day. So depending on what your kind of housekeeping tasks are, that's something to consider. So back to the practice routine. I really encourage you all to use a timer. and to work in 20 to 25-minute chunks. I can't recommend this enough. It sounds simple, but it's not, because actually you could be surprised. You might set the timer and 20 minutes could fly by. And then other days you'll set the timer and you'll be like, is this 20 minutes over yet? What is going on? So I really recommend just trying to stay as focused as possible during that time. And once the timer does go off, using if you need to go use your phone, check your phone, whatever, that's fine. But really trying to keep 20 to 25 minutes of no distraction time is key. And I think you might be surprised to see how technology and social media has shortened our attention spans. 20 minutes can really seem crazy long. So I, as a saxophonist and woodwind doubler, I always start my days with flute. If I'm doing a long practice day, I'll always start with flute first, just because of the way it works for my muscles. I prefer to go from flute to clarinet to saxophone. And then I feel really, really warmed up. It's a good test to go from saxophone to flute, but I just enjoy kind of easing in terms of the embouchures. So with flute and clarinet and saxophone, I have a little bit of a specific regimen that I'll do, starting with long tones for 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, overtones for 10 to 15 minutes, altissimo for another 10 to 15 minutes, and altissimo is mostly on saxophone only. And so I'll do with flute, I'll do my long tones, my overtones, maybe some scales, and then any type of repertoire I'm working on. And that could be 45 minutes right there. And I'll take a break. Maybe I go do some emails. Maybe I'll make a couple of phone calls, going back to kind of chipping away at my goals, objectives, whatever projects I'm working on. Then I'll bounce back, and then I'll start my clarinet session and do my long tones, my overtones, my scales, and whatever repertoire I'm trying to do. Same thing, finish that up. Maybe it's 40 minutes. Take a break, switch gears a little bit, and then come back. And with saxophone, long tones, overtones, altissimo, scales, patterns, I often will take a little nugget of information and try to put it through all 12 keys. It doesn't have to be a full tune or a full solo or anything, but just a little nugget of information just to keep things flowing and kind of keep the dust away. And then I might work on a transcription or work on playing in a particular style or feel or tempo, whatever it is. And the key to all of this for anybody of any age and any ability level, I really find for productive practice, you have to keep a journal. You have to keep a record of what you're doing, because so often we can get distracted with everything else in our lives that when we sit down in the practice room, we might just practice what feels good. And that often means you're practicing your strengths. And if you're only practicing your strengths, that means your weaknesses are left way down here. And really what our practice time is for is to focus on your weaknesses. So I will keep a list of all of these categories under flute, under clarinet, under saxophone, and under each category, like overtones, long tones, scales, whatever it is, I have about 5 to 10 different exercises that I can pick from in those categories. So no matter what instrument you are, or if you're a vocalist, really try to collect as much material as you can from mentors, from peers and colleagues and friends. Hey, what are you working on for overtones? What are you working on for long tones? And collect all of these different things, because you also don't want to stay too stagnant in your practice routines every day. Even if I can only get in 15 or 20 minutes for some reason, I know I'm going to do long tones and overtones and maybe, play through a tune. And if that's what happens for a few days in a row, I don't want it to be the same long tone and overtone exercise. So the mindset behind that is that you are checking these major boxes of categories in what you kind of eating like your major food groups, but you're working different muscles underneath each of these categories. So, between my 5 different top long tone exercises, they might work very different things. One might work more in subtone. One might work more on my breath attack. One might work on just my stamina. So It seems probably very detailed and specific, but I think it's a really methodical way to take control of your growth and your productivity and your success. So if anybody has any questions, we're going to get to a little bit of a Q&A there in terms of the practice routine. But I'd like to just revisit the general mindset of building your success and deciding what fuels you. So I would say for you guys this week, you know, if you're gonna come back next week, I would love for you to have these 3 takeaways from episode 1, which are to define your mission, what makes you happy, what brings you joy, what are your strengths, and maybe you are a musician, but you also love something else, and there's a way that you can combine 2 passions. Like perhaps you are really into web design and you're also a great player and you want to play. Is there something that you can do? Well, yeah, you can design websites for artists. You can design websites for musicians. You know, and even if you're into education and you're you know, teaching a lot, private teaching and building up your skills in education, and that platform is a whole other situation in terms of routines and things to practice for that. So just take a look at your passions and try to lay things out in this way. And then takeaway number 2 would be setting the goals and objectives for that mission and really sticking to them and being ruthless. And if you can afford to, be ruthless in, you know, what inquiries come in, what's demanding your time. Can you say no? Can you afford to say no because this doesn't fit it's not in alignment with your goals and objectives? Then maybe try it and see how it feels, and see how it feels to take that time and spend it on what really is meaningful for you. And then takeaway number 3 is establish your routine. And this will take a while. It's not something that you can do overnight, and I'm still tweaking mine. But try it out. And there are so many different resources out there online, many different ways to start the day. Some people prefer to exercise in the morning, and I prefer to exercise at night just to kind of put a cap on my day. And that's really right now just in quarantine. Who knows what will happen when we go back to opening up. But yeah, I can't recommend it enough. It helps to keep things digestible, and I can look at my projects and say, I know how I'm going to get here. I can get here, as opposed to looking at something and saying, how am I going to get there? That's so daunting. Yeah, so that's essentially my kind of crash course to productivity, taking control of your success, and making it happen on a day-by-day basis. So define your mission, set your goals and objectives, and establish your routine. And then just go out and make it happen. And I'd love to hear from our people and see what everybody's thinking and how this is resonating.
Awesome. Thanks, Alexa. Let's see. Let's get to some questions. So for anyone just joining us, this is the debut episode of The Well-Rounded Musician with Alexa Tarantino. Before we start with the Q&A, I just want to thank you, Alexa, for all this amazing insight. And also to thank all of our supporters who contribute to the cause and help us do what we can to serve the global jazz community. As we move on to some questions, if you have one you'd like to ask, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom. To do this, click participants on the bottom of your Zoom window, and then in the participants tab, press the raise hand button. Also, as a side note, please also just make sure that your full name appears as your username so that I can call on you when it's your turn. And then when it is your turn, I'll just call your name and turn your mic on so we can hear you. I'll give you guys a few seconds to raise hand and get to that, and maybe I'll take a quick question from Facebook Live, Alexa. Here's one from Daryl Daniels. He's wondering if you have any insight into how most professional musicians are getting by these days.
Yeah, well, a lot of our work has gone online. So I know a lot of people, myself included, who are doing concerts from home, live streamed. I'm really fortunate that I live with a pianist, another jazz musician and composer, so we're able to perform from home on Sunday nights, and we're also able to, you know, if if people are working on studio recordings or putting, you know, larger projects together, we're able to record from home, like in a home studio setting. Of course, there are so many incredible organizations that are offering, you know, relief grants to artists and things like that. I think it's definitely a tough time for anybody who's a freelancer, not even, you know, not specifically musicians, but just any freelance professional. But I think it's also a really great time for people to reflect if we're able. You know, fingers crossed, hoping everybody's happy and healthy. If you can take the time to look at your priorities and think about this as a shift and see, you know, when we do go back to sort of our regular lives, what can I do to maintain my, you know, sense of priority and goals and mission, and make sure that I am fueling what inspires me, as opposed to maybe letting the exterior things get kind of too far into what you're doing. But I definitely send good vibes to all of my fellow freelance musicians, because I know we're all doing Zoom lessons and Zoom calls and brainstorming all these projects. So it's really great to see the creativity and love that's coming from the scene.
That's great. All right, we got a couple questions coming in now, so I'll turn it over to our first one. It's coming from Frederic. Frederic, go ahead.
Yes, hi, Alexa.
Hi.
Hi, maybe you won't see my ugly unkempt hair. The other day, Walter mentioned 2 books for overtone. I used to practice that, and I kind of forgot, let it go on the side. So I had Sigmund Rascher, but he mentioned a book by Rosemary, and I could never get the last name. Do you know which book he was talking about?
By Rosemary?
Yeah.
I don't know anybody named Rosemary that wrote an overtone book. The first name was Rosemary?
I think so. I only got Rosemary Lane. I think I texted him. I didn't hear from him, and I could get. Besides Sigmund Rascher, do you recommend anything?
Yes. So Top Tones. Top Tones is a really great book. And let me see. I wonder if, are you still there, Frederic? Yes. So Top Tones is a great one, and then Voicing by Donald Sinta is another great one.
Donald Sinta?
Yes, Sinta.
Okay, great.
Those are my 2 favorites. Voicing was actually the one that got me really going with overtones. And I'm sorry, Top Tones is the Rascher book. But I would say Voicing would be my next best bet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good luck.
Frederic.
Yes, I need to review that, and I got a long time ago all the bells and rings from email and what have you, and I just do it in the morning, in the evening, sometime midday, because I have some other business and stuff, and that's it. I try not to get into that, otherwise forget it. You go to bed, get lost. So.
Oh, look here.
You.
So Chloe responded, excellent, amazing, Chloe. Overtones by Rosemary Aitken. I don't know that book, so I'll have to look it up myself. But that's great.
Yeah, it looks like Aitken is the last name.
Aitken?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Frederic.
Thank you.
All right, let's take another question. We've got one from Burnell Jones.
Awesome.
Burnell, go ahead.
Hey, back to what you were talking about when you said you're practicing different styles in your routine. I'm trying to incorporate the music of Latin and Cuban artists in my routine, and I'd like to know some tips to get more comfortable with playing over that music without sounding like I'm trying not to sound like a jazz musician playing over that music, but I'm trying to sound like somebody who more familiar with the music.
Yeah, of course. Well, you're an alto player, right?
Tenor player.
Tenor player, okay. I was gonna say, so Bobby Porcelli is my absolute favorite alto player, and he's still here in New York City. He played with everybody Back in the day, he played with Tito Puente, he played with Machito, he played with Tito Rodriguez. And I was really lucky. I got to sit next to him every Sunday night at Birdland with Arturo O'Farrell and the Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra. And he is just incredible. So honestly, any recording that you can find that he's on, and he's probably on a bunch that you know and you didn't know he's on them.
Bobby,
Porcelli, Porcelli.
got you.
And he, for me, is like the guy to check out. But in terms, I mean, Kenya is like is a very influential record by Machito, and Don, I think it's Don, it's Cannonball, and is it Don Cherry maybe that's on that together with him. Kenya is a great record just to like get the vibe, and of course, I mean, Tito Puente and again Machito and Tito Rodriguez are like the big three of the really influential musicians. And of course, my guy Carlos Enriquez would probably have many other suggestions, but I always learn a lot from hearing him talk about this stuff too. So if you can get in touch with Carlos, I'm sure he would have many recommendations. But I mean, the collaborations like with Cannonball, sounded like Cannonball, but sounded amazing over that music. And so I think, you can sound like a jazz musician, like you should sound like you, but just trying to take into account some of the classic rhythms and the feel and the style of that music. And if you can add in some of that, I think your bebop lines are still perfectly welcome. I mean, from the stuff that Cannonball played, it was incredible.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Brunel. All right, let me take another question from the comments. We've got an interesting one from Tracy Oliver. She said, what non-musical things are you doing now to prepare for the great reopening after COVID-19, business planning, etc.?
That's a great question. Besides my Italian learning, well, I guess this is non-musical. It's more in the education world. Pianist and composer Stephen Feifke and I just launched an educational platform called A Step Ahead Jazz, and so we're launching an online summer jazz program. So that's more in the educational realm of things. So I've been working on just putting all my materials online, and I guess that includes, social media, marketing, updating my website. I recently am in the process of launching a blog, and my summer program, Rockport Jazz Workshop, got canceled. So I'm trying to kind of pull that community in and get those students engaged too. And I know there are so many other programs that have been canceled. So I'm looking at the educational side of things and trying to figure out how to keep everybody engaged during this time. Even when we do open up, all these programs are going to be gone this summer. But completely non-musical, non-jazz, I'm trying to exercise and get fit and be healthy, because in the past several months when I was just touring so much, it was really easy to let that slip. And so I'm really trying to take that as a primary focus. Because you have to take care of yourself in order to be helpful and a good contribution and working relationship with others. So I would say health, and I'm also just reading a lot. I mean, I'm obsessed with this productivity and efficiency and mindset stuff. So I'm reading a ton about that and just trying to grow as a person.
That's awesome. Thanks. All right, let's take another question. We've got one from Scott Torrance. Scott, go ahead.
Hi, Alexa. Thanks for your advice.
Hi, Scott.
I'm just an amateur musician and have limited time to practice every day. But during quarantine, I've really got into recording and composition. And I was just wondering how you deal with those things, because it seems like, so my technical practicing has just kind of gone off it doesn't happen anymore. And I was just wondering how you deal with those things, because they seem like two very different skill sets, or not skill sets, but activities, where sometimes you might need an hour or 5 hours when you're working on a composition or recording, whereas technical practicing, you can, yeah, in your little chunks of time, as you mentioned, you can get through all those, and then you're finished and done for the day. But so how do you deal with those things?
So what type, can you describe a little bit more like the recording setting?
Yeah, so it's just me, as well as, I'm working with some people remotely as well. And so they're sending some things over, and then, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So one thing that I wish I was doing more of is composing. And for me, it's such an open-ended process. I know some people that can really just like write a big band chart in a couple of hours, and I'm just not like that. So for me, if I'm really in the groove with composing, it would be, even just taking 20 minutes a day just to get the juices flowing and see what comes out, and write a bunch of ideas down. And maybe I, take one of them out of 15 of them, but just to keep the muscle working. I think that if you can do the small chunks of time for composition, it's definitely beneficial. It doesn't feel the same as sitting down for 3 hours, like making a latte and sitting down for 3 hours, and after that you come out with a new tune that you love. That's a great feeling too. But for me, it just doesn't always happen that way. So to keep my like compositional facility up, I would probably recommend trying to just see what comes from the short bursts. And then if you can kind of fit in a long burst here and there, I think that's great. But sometimes it's even interesting to see what happens and how a piece would be different, with those short bursts. And after taking time to reflect on something and coming back after a while, you might find it goes in a different direction than you expected. So that's how I would approach the composition stuff. With recording, during this quarantine, I'm finding that feels kind of like the job, like the day job. So that feels like it can be a little bit more regimented. So if you're doing both, maybe you can try to keep the recording a little bit regimented. Like, okay, I'm going to work on this session recording from 4 to 5:30. And then, anytime before that, I'm just going to explore like writing this tune, like say you're free from 1 to 5:30 or something like that. The recording, I really am trying to keep it limited because it's so easy to be critical and do 15 takes of something. And then, when you listen back, the first 5 were all probably fine. We're all probably good. I'm sometimes my own worst critic. So the recording stuff can really take a lot out of me and take a lot of time. So I just be wary of that and make sure that you're being kind to yourself and not letting that take up your whole day.
And do you always still maintain your technical, like you're practicing though, throughout all of this when you're doing recording or composition?
Yeah. So if anything falls to the wayside for me, it's composition.
Yeah. Okay.
I find that my composition stuff, it usually is I'm writing the most in the summer because I usually have an annual recording session in September. So I'm usually writing
a deadline
for that in like July and August.
Okay. Okay. Thanks very much.
Of course.
Thanks, Scott. All right, let's take another question from the Facebook Live comments. This question is, do you ever feel boxed in with to-do lists? Do you ever leave unscheduled time for just play?
Yes. Who asked this question?
The question is from Renato.
Oh, okay. Awesome. I thought maybe it was a friend of mine because I have this conversation with friends all the time. I often feel boxed in by to-do lists. And then, when I feel that maybe if I've had too much unscheduled time, it's this weird dichotomy of feeling like I'm being so productive and then I'm being not productive at all. And so even during this quarantine, I've experienced a roller coaster of emotions in terms of my productivity and how I'm doing. And I think the biggest lesson that I'm always trying to remind myself is that you just have to be kind to yourself, and you absolutely do need to schedule unstructured time. I know I didn't really go into like after 5:30 p.m. in my daily routine, but after I go for my run and have dinner and make another phone call to a friend or family member, I really am trying to use this quarantine time to enjoy my nights off. Because in regular life, I'm almost always, performing at night or going to a gig or something like that. And so it's really been interesting to shift to this different routine where I'm not staying out late. I generally wake up pretty early anyway. I can't really sleep in like your stereotypical jazz musician, but definitely do unstructured time. And I think another tip that actually my same friend Janelle, the web designer, she stopped calling it to-do lists and she started calling it action items. And sometimes I do that. So I still sometimes say to-do list, but there might be a better way for you to frame it for yourself so you're excited to do it rather than feeling like it's imposing.
Awesome. That's a great tip. And one more from the comments. Philip was wondering, I still want to be realistic without experiencing burnout. How can I balance that?
Great question, Philip. I think it comes down to looking at your mission, looking at your goals, and looking at your objectives and making sure that they are realistic. Making sure that the objectives are totally actionable. If you need to break them down into smaller steps within each objective, do it. I would much rather cross off lots of little things on my to-do list than have this one giant thing on my to-do list that I just can't seem to cross off. So I definitely recommend making sure that you've got everything broken down into steps, because I mean, I've heard people take this approach when paying off like student loans and debt as well. It's like the snowball effect. And that idea is, I think with finances, that you just pay off the smallest thing first, and then you're like feeling like you're on a roll, and then you go to the next biggest, and the next, and you're like chipping away. I think there is like the opposite approach as well, but for me with to-do lists, I would rather be like, I'm on a roll, I crossed these 3 things off, I'm on a roll, this one's easy, I got this. So and you can also say, okay, I'm going to take the whole day off today. I'm not going to do anything. And that way I'm going to be really excited for the next day when I'm going to want to pick up my computer again and start that next page on my website or whatever it is. So for me, I've tried actually during this quarantine to take Wednesdays and Saturdays off. It's not totally working, but there was one week where it worked and it felt great. I'm working a little bit on Sundays, so that's why I did that. But I actually really like taking this time off in the middle of the week, because then you got Monday, Tuesday, you got Thursday, Friday. It feels much more manageable. So if anybody has the flexibility to do that, I think we can all try that together.
Awesome. So I'm just going to take one more question before we wrap up.
Okay.
But I want to remind everybody to please make sure to join us again for future sessions of The Well-Rounded Musician with Alexa, and also a ton of other live events that we're hosting for free throughout the coming weeks, including masterclasses, concerts, lessons, and interactive conversations. A new episode of The Well-Rounded Musician will be streamed live every Thursday at this same time. And in our next session on Thursday, May 14th, Alexa will discuss how to create your own jazz community, with crucial topics including networking, utilizing databases, communication advice, and public speaking. And for a full list of upcoming events and archived concerts, please check out Jazz at Lincoln Center's brand new online hub at jazz.org. With that, our last question will be coming from James Prendergast. James, go ahead.
Hi, James. I think you might be muted.
Let's see.
Okay,
there you are.
Okay,
You're good
perfect,
now.
Perfect.
Hello. So I've just started studying at a conservatorium. So if you can't understand me well, I'm from Australia. I've just started studying at a conservatorium here, first year, and I'm just wondering, on saxophone as well. I'm just wondering, how do you go about practicing your tunes?
Practicing learning tunes?
Yeah.
Great question. So I, surprise, have a little bit of a process for this as well. But I think, it's super important to learn tunes by ear as much as you can. So my first thing is I will find the definitive recording, or whatever, as many recordings as I can find, just to hear many different people's perspectives. And then you want to make sure you understand the form of the song, learn the melody by ear, and then learn the bass line by ear, like the root movement by ear. And then from there, I'll just improvise rhythms on those roots going through the tune. I call it roots and rhythms. And again, like I know it sounds very rudimentary, but this really helps to solidify the harmony in your brain. I cannot tell you how many times I've gone to a jam session and maybe somebody says, can we play this tune? I'm like, yeah, I remember this tune 75% of the way. And I always remember the melodies, but it's always, for me, it's always the chord changes where I'm kind of like, I don't always remember 100%. And no matter what, after playing the melody through, you know, if I'm really zeroing in on the bass, it comes right back. So that's the biggest thing. If you can walk around singing bass lines to yourself on these tunes as a saxophonist or a horn player, that's amazing, because it shows you really have a control and understanding of the harmony of, you know, all the voice leading between each chord. And so from the roots and the rhythms, I will go through and work on all the arpeggios, 1, 3, 5, 7 on every chord, and I'll do all the different permutations of that. Just quiz myself, you know, even if I'm singing, making dinner or something, I'll say to myself 7, 1, 3, 5, and I'll sing through a blues like ba ba boo ba 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 boo ba 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 boo ba, you know, just go through all of the chords like that. And then I'll expand to scales. So just kind of getting comfortable putting the appropriate scales in on each measure, and bebop scales, you know, minor scales, melodic minor scales, whatever the options are, just exploring all options. And then I'll take a look and really, I'll pick like one small idea on a chord. So if we're doing a blues, I might pick like ba 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 dee bum, ba 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 da ba, ba 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 dee da da. Way ba 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 ba, way ba 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 wee bo bo. You know, just take one idea on one chord and then shift it like just almost like a cut and paste or a copy and paste to the next chord, but with an understanding of the notes that needs to change and the voice leading that needs to change. And so from there, that's when I work on my voice leading and my motivic development, picking some ideas, growing them into new ideas and taking those. And then I'll also just kind of take little idiomatic licks that I like, or maybe things from people's solos. If it's a bird tune, obviously, you know, revisit a bird solo and take little nuggets of those things. And similar to Brunel's question when he was asking about, you know, playing in a Latin jazz style, I will, if I'm just playing a blues, I try to play a blues in 12 keys every time that I practice, but I might, you know, put on a 10 chorus track of an F blues, and maybe that first chorus I'll try to play in the style of Coleman Hawkins, and then in the second chorus maybe Lester Young, and then the next chorus Charlie Parker, and next chorus Dexter Gordon, next chorus Kenny Garrett and Dick Oates and Phil Woods, whoever I'm inspired by. It doesn't have to be saxophonist, but trying to think about those approaches and put them onto something that's familiar to you, like a blues or whatever tune you might be working on. It enables you to access that person's approach or that style of jazz or that era a little bit easier when you're putting it on familiar material.
Thanks, James. All right, and thanks again to everyone for joining us and for your wonderful questions. I hope you've enjoyed this debut episode of The Well-Rounded Musician with Alexa Tarantino, and I hope you'll join us again next Thursday for episode 2. Before I sign off, any closing words from you, Alexa?
I think that's everything. Just, you know, find your mission, set your goals and objectives, and establish your routine, and go out and make it happen.
All right. Thanks, Alexa, and thanks, everybody. We'll see
Thanks,
you next time.